Good morning and welcome to the second of our Lunch with the League series. Before we start, I would like to make a few announcements. Please remain muted throughout the session, and there will be a question and answer session after we hear from our speaker today. So if you have any questions for him, please put them in the chat directed to Kathy Morgan. Finally, I would like to advise you that this session is being recorded, and the link to the recording of each of the sessions will be available on our League website. The link to the website is in the chat. At this time, I would like to introduce our president of our local league, Betsy Patterson, who will make a few remarks.
Thank you, Pat. I'm Betsy Patterson, president of our local League of Women Voters. The League of Women Voters was founded in 1920, 6 months before the ratification of the 19th Amendment, granting women their right to vote nationwide. It was established as a nonpartisan grassroots organization to encourage voters to become active participants in our democracy. The League has many activities, including registering voters, informing them about the issues and the candidates through our voter guides and candidate forums, and getting out the vote during elections. We also educate the public about how our government works. In this series, we will interview Ventura County elected officials to learn what their roles are in the government, what skills are required, and what challenges they face. It is not a candidate forum nor a campaign opportunity. It is a chance to educate the public about the work they do in the day-to-day functioning of our county. Thank you for joining us. We hope you gain a better understanding of what our county elected officials do in their jobs. And now I would like to turn the program over to our Voter Services Chair, Pat Malchek.
Thank you, Betsy. Appreciate that so much. Okay, at this time, I have the pleasure to introduce our County Sheriff, Bill Ayub. Welcome, Sheriff Ayub, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here with you all. And thank you for taking an interest in local elections. When I ran for office the first time, I discovered how few people really pay attention to what's going on in the political landscape, especially locally. And local is very important. So I appreciate you all taking interest to learn about what we do in Ventura County.
Thank you. Okay, William Ayub was elected as the 20th Sheriff of Ventura County in 2018. He joined the Ventura County Sheriff's Office in April of 1996 after serving as a police officer for several years in the city of North Las Vegas, Nevada, and the city of Port Hueneme. Bill's diverse and extensive law enforcement experiences range from assignments in patrol, custody, SWAT, academy instructor, investigations, and administration. Bill has a Master's of Science degree in Emergency Services Administration from California State University at Long Beach. He is a graduate of the California Post Command College and the FBI National Institute. As a commander, Bill was instrumental in bringing body-worn camera technology to the sheriff office. He is a member of many associations and organizations, including Ventura County Management and Council, California State Sheriff's Association, where he was recently elected Sergeant of Arms, Major County Sheriffs of America, FBI National Executive Institute Associates, and California's Racial and Identity Profiling Advisory Board, to name a few. Thank you. Okay, Bill, I'm going to ask you a few questions to lead us into our discussion about your office. My first question, Sheriff Ayub, can you please explain to us what the qualifications and prerequisites are that prepare one for the role of county sheriff?
Sure. So the county sheriff is a constitutional officer. It's one of two constitutional officers that are prescribed in the California Constitution for each county. The district attorney is is elected in our county, but not a constitutional officer. Believe it's the tax collector and the sheriff. Sheriffs originally, in the early days of our state, were tax collectors, and they typically held other positions in the community, such as shop keeps, business owners, butchers, that sort of thing. And then they were called into action when there was a need, a crime was committed and so forth, typically a theft of a horse or some rustling of some cattle and so forth, particularly in Ventura County. Ventura County, of course, was established in 1873. Our first sheriff was a business member in the community and served for a short term. And sheriffs for a number of years, and as you mentioned, I'm the 20th sheriff, which is not a lot in almost 150 years. But in the early days, sheriffs served for very short periods of time, generally. And as the profession, or as the role of sheriff professionalized, probably in the mid 50s or so, you saw the terms of sheriffs last for much longer periods. We had a sheriff that served in office over 20 years, and up until 1989, there were no requirements other than being of legal age of adulthood to run for office of the sheriff. And as the profession, or as the office of the sheriff professionalized, the electorate recognized that, hey, this is a complex duty. It's probably not the best thing for us to just pull somebody off the street and put them in charge of a complex operation. It's a good idea for people that run for sheriff to have some sort of experience. And so some legislation was enacted in 1989 that required individuals interested in running for the office of the sheriff to have a certain amount of experience as a peace officer in California. They didn't have to be current peace officers. They didn't have to be managers or supervisors or anything like that. They just had to have some experience as peace officers. And so that is carried through today. There was actually a legislative effort last year to strip away those requirements and return it to just an elected position that anybody could run for, but that did not advance in the state's legislature. So it's about a 6-year. It depends on level of formal education and level of experience as a professional peace officer, a full-time professional peace officer in our state. So there's a formula there.
Okay, and when you mentioned that about term, my next question is, how long is your term, and are there term limits?
Sure. The sheriff has a 4-year term, and the election is on the midterm cycle, so the gubernatorial cycle, along with the other county elected offices, the district attorney, the tax collector, the treasurer, and the auditor controller. The supervisors, of course, alternate between the gubernatorial and presidential cycle. The office of the sheriff does not have term limits, so one conceivably could run, forever in essence, and keep winning re-election.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. What is your department's budget, and how many employees are in your department?
So we have a pretty large operation. And I mentioned when I ran for office the first time, a lot of people they didn't even know what a sheriff did, or that we had a sheriff's office, or that they could vote for somebody to fill the office of sheriff. We have 1,269 full-time equivalents. So just under 1,300 employees and a $300 million budget.
Okay. Can you tell me what are the top 3 priorities or functions of your office?
Mm-hmm. So the sheriff is mandated to run the county jails. And so we have 3 jails in Ventura County, one at the government center and another at the Todd Road facility between Ventura and Santa Paula, and then a third at the Thousand Oaks police station on Olson Road. And so we run those jails. We tend to the courts as bailiffs. So we have 3 courthouses in Ventura County as well. One at the government center, another at the Juvenile Justice Center on Vineyard and the El Rio area of the unincorporated Ventura County, and then in Simi Valley, there's a courthouse as well. And so we're the bailiffs, and we provide security at those courthouses. And then we're tasked with keeping the peace in the community. And that's sort of an ambiguous responsibility. We do it through law enforcement. The sheriff is not mandated to enforce the laws except for a few situations where there is mandated enforcement for peace officers. But by and large, the sheriff has no obligation to enforce laws. We do it as a means of keeping the peace in the community. And so in Ventura County, the sheriff polices the entire unincorporated area, which is about 95% of the county's geographical area. It includes some of the ocean, as well as 2 islands off the coast. And then 5 of the county's 10 cities pay the sheriff's office to be their police force. So we actually have 5 municipal police forces that we provide countywide, and in addition to all the other things that we do. And we operate a crime laboratory and an aviation program and a marine program and a bomb squad, a SWAT team, a police academy. So very, very diverse operation. You can see by how diverse and technical the operation is, why you need somebody with some experience to fill the role of sheriff.
I see. Can you share with me, Sheriff, what are the 5 municipalities that would be helpful if you could let us know?
Sure. There's 10 cities in Ventura County. 5 have their own police department. 5 contract with the sheriff. Those 5 are Thousand Oaks, Camarillo, Moore Park, Fillmore, and Ojai.
Thank you. That's very, very helpful to know. Thank you. Finally, my last question for you, Sheriff. What are the challenges that your department is facing at this time? What do you feel?
How much time do we have?
I know. I know. I understand.
We are facing so many challenges. I could talk for a good deal of time about them. Certainly COVID has impacted everybody. It's been a challenge for us in a variety of ways. We're currently, like everybody else, navigating this surge that we're seeing in our community. We have, basic core functions that we do: our patrol services, our detention services, our courts. Many of our support services are being impacted so that we can maintain our staffing and our essential services. So we're juggling schedules. We're tightening our belt in certain areas where we have our support functions such as detectives and background investigators and gang unit and civil unit and so forth. Many of those people are filling vacancies that in patrol and detention that are created by people that are out with quarantine because they've contracted the COVID virus. This has been an ongoing challenge for us from the beginning of the pandemic. The sheriff also operates the county's Office of Emergency Services, and that group of people, the professionals, have been integral in securing leases for the homeless shelters during the COVID crisis, for procuring personal protective equipment, for administering and setting up testing sites for COVID, vaccination sites as well. And so they've been incredibly busy, and that's on top of managing the preparation and mitigation of emergencies that happen in the community, such as wildfires and floods and so forth. And fortunately, we haven't had too many of those lately, and knock on wood that we continue to not. We're seeing a change in our community related to what we call prison realignment. And I'm sure everybody that's listening has been paying attention to overcrowding that we saw in our state prison system. State prison system is aging. There's a lot of facilities that aren't up to standards that they should be. And there were problems with overcrowding and living conditions within the state prison system. Some people say, we don't, they could live in tents as far as I'm concerned. Well, that's great. And the courts have placed mandates upon the California Department of Corrections, county sheriffs, on the levels of care they have to provide in their jail system. And so we're mandated to provide certain levels of medical and psychiatric care, food requirements, safe and secure environment for folks to live in. We're responsible for everyone that's in our care as an inmate. And so the state, in response to the court's order to reduce their overcrowding situation, had two options. They could build more prisons, or they could release people. And so they chose the latter. They chose to release people, and they've done it through a number of different schemes. One involved reducing sentences and pushing some people out into the community before the end of their prison term was fulfilled. In other cases, some lower level offenders were released from the state prison system and pushed into the county jails. And so county jails are intended to be holding facilities for pretrial inmates, and then confinement facilities for misdemeanants. So short periods of confinement. They were never designed or intended to be long-term confinement facilities, which is what they've now turned into because of the state prison realignment. So it's added complications to county sheriffs to manage an aging and more sophisticated inmate population, as well as provide vocational services and educational opportunities and other things that we want to see inmates get so that they can transition back into the community, become contributing members of society versus criminal offenders. And so that's complicated things for us. We've also seen a sort of destruction of our criminal justice system in terms of penalties for criminal behavior. And we're seeing some of that manifested in these brazen organized retail thefts that we've seen on television. A lot of them occurred in the large metropolitan areas, but we do see those in our county as well. In fact, we live next door to a major metropolitan area, and very often organized criminals from Los Angeles come to Ventura County to steal from our neighborhoods, our business community, and so forth. So the state prison realignment, the complications that we're seeing related to the reduction of sentences, the removal of tools that we as a law enforcement organization have to keep the community safe, definitely keeps us on our toes. It's something that keeps me up at night, trying to figure out how to hold back the floodwaters of criminal behavior. We're seeing crime rise in counties around us, and yet we're still managing to keep crime low here, and it's very purposeful, very deliberate, and it's not easy. But we have fantastic support in our community. Are the men and women that serve, have a heart and mind for service, and so we're managing to hold that back. We are also challenged, incredibly challenged, with recruiting and retaining the best and brightest employees. We still manage to get terrific employees. They are just much harder to find these days. Many are leaving the state for a different political environment, cheaper cost of housing, often misrepresented as cheaper cost of living. I was one of those at one point. I went to Las Vegas and lived for a few years. The housing was much cheaper. Everything else was as much or more there. And so I learned my lesson. I came back to my home, Ventura County. But finding those excellent employees to give the superior service that we try to provide and really do provide in the community is a challenge. And we actually are very short-staffed right now because of the COVID pandemic and the restrictions that have been placed on us. We had to cancel an academy class and extend the start of another. I mentioned we run a police academy, and that academy actually services every police department and the sheriff's office in Ventura County, as well as many in Santa Barbara and San Luis Obispo counties. And so every police agency, every sheriff's office, our highway patrol, we're all short-staffed right now, and that's an impact as well on morale, and fatigue is always a major concern with our folks, and keeping them happy and healthy and finely tuned to provide that high level of service.
Well, thank you, Sheriff. That was a very informative answer to our question regarding challenges. Thank you very much for that. At this time, I'd like to ask you, before we end this interview portion, is there anything you would like to add that we have not covered?
I would just like to say that you're all residents of our county, and I work for all of you. I often get asked, I have younger deputies say, it must be nice not to have a boss. I said, I have 870,000 bosses. And I worked in Las Vegas, and I felt, and Las Vegas is a very rough city. The particular area that I worked was extremely rough. And I didn't feel like I had any, and I really didn't have a lot of support from the community. I felt like we were part of an occupying army. We were kind of seen as the enemy. And if somebody was fleeing from a police officer, they were welcome in most homes in the neighborhoods where I worked. And it was fun and exciting for a young policeman. But coming back to Ventura County, I recognized how valuable and how appreciative I was and am for the community relationship that we have, for that support that we feel in the county to do our jobs. It's why we're one of the safest counties west of the Mississippi year after year after year, and why crime's going up in other places and why it stays low here. It's because we have this great community. It empowers the deputies and officers to serve it, and inspires them to serve it. And it's just an absolute honor to serve in this community. And I thank you for that.
Well, thank you, Sheriff, for all this important information you have shared and helping us understand your position and your office as well. At this time, we are going to open it up to questions from the attendees. And I will turn it over to my co-chair, Kathy Morgan, to facilitate the questions and answer session.
Thank you, Pat, and welcome, Sheriff Ayub. It's been very interesting hearing everything that you had to say. Before I start with the questions we have received, I just want to let everybody know that if they have a question for the sheriff, you can address it to me in the chat, and we'll get to it. So Sheriff Ayub, I know you spoke a little bit about the low crime rate here in Ventura County, and I imagine that is one of the ways we as voters can gauge the effectiveness of your office. Do you have other markers that we can look to gauge the effectiveness of your department?
Yeah, thanks for asking that. Yes, and crime statistics can be misleading, and I say that because some jurisdictions don't investigate crimes as responsibly, as honestly as others. And so to make an apples to apples comparison, it's not always the case. So, one of a component of our mission statement is that our job is to create neighborhoods that are free from the fear of crime. And so we want people to feel safe in their communities. We want them to feel comfortable that if they call us, and we know most people, they don't want to call, they want to handle things themselves. They think we're too busy. They think whatever they're calling about is not important to us. We want them to call. That way we know what's going on in our community. And we know that if they call us, they trust us or have some level of trust that we're going to come out and do something responsive to their needs. And so no call for service for us is trivial. And part of my direction to my folks is to treat people as though they're your neighbor or a family member, that you're going to have to listen to the story about how the deputy treated them when he or she stopped them for a traffic violation. And people expect deputy sheriffs and police officers to enforce the law. I've been stopped. I've had a ticket before. I deserved it. And if you treat people fairly, it can actually be a positive experience for them. But we want people to have that trust that we're going to come out and we're going to do something responsive, that our investigative follow-ups are going to be thorough and professional, and that we're going to hold people accountable when we identify criminal behavior that they're responsible for. And so that's a really important thing. Year before last, when we had a lot of social justice related protests and so forth in the community, we really seized on an opportunity that presented itself. We had been working with a data analytics organization called SAS, and they're a global organization. They do a lot of work in the private sector, some in the public sector as well. And we brought them in. They were interested in partnering with a law enforcement organization, and we brought them in to work on a gun collection procedure we were working on. We had some grant funding to take guns out of the hands of people that shouldn't have them, convicted felons and so forth that were out in the community. And the data collection component of that was very onerous. We found that the records were kind of shoddy on the state side. We were trying to collate data. We didn't want to just send deputies out into the community sort of randomly knocking on doors and so forth. And so we partnered with SAS to build some internal dashboards so that we could manage our operation more effectively and efficiently. And when the unrest was happening locally, we had activist organizations coming forward and saying, hey, we think you guys are stop people in a disparate way. You show bias in some situations. You use force to an excessive degree, and all these different things where I would immediately want to be defensive and say no, we don't. We've certainly made mistakes in the past. We'll likely make them in the future, but we strive to do things really well and above board. And I would cull data together from these different sources, and I would produce, records and reports on, how many different times we'd stop people and how few times there was an incident of use of force involved. And we decided, rather than culling this information and each and every time these questions arose, could we produce dashboards for the public's view to where they can get in and look for themselves and see real time what we're doing, what they're getting for their dollars. We had a $300 million operation. We better be giving you some darn good service. Mm-hmm. And so we created in just a 6-month period of time some really impressive data dashboards. There's one on use of force, and it has overlays where you can look by jurisdiction, you can look by type of force used, outcome of the force, whether there was an injury to the person the force was used upon or to the deputy. We have every officer involved shooting dating back to the early 60s that the sheriff's office has been involved with. Every one of them is detailed and outlined in this dashboard, so that you can see what we've done and what we continue to do. There's also stop data related to the people that we encounter in the community. You can see who we stop, where, and what the disposition of the stop is based on community, and you can compare communities, and you can also see crime statistics. You can compare those crimes that are collected by the FBI that they call them Part 1 crimes. They've been collected for almost 100 years. And that's one of the measurements that people look at is those Part 1 crimes. They compare them across jurisdictions. And you can look right here in Ventura County and compare different sheriff's jurisdictions, even the municipal police departments, because they all provide that data to the FBI, and we have that available to us. So if you have an opportunity, please go to our website, venturasheriff.org, and look under the transparency tab and take a look at our dashboards. They're really cool. I'm super proud of them. And that's a measurement of our work product in the community. We're trying to drive use of force incidents lower. And when we do have to use force, we're hoping for an outcome that does not develop into an injury to any party. And so those are things we continuously work on.
Well, that's very interesting to know, and thank you for telling us we can go to your website and look at those dashboards. I think that's very helpful information. Since you kind of brought it up, do members of your department receive training like in de-escalation and also in implicit bias?
We do. We have a program locally. It's called Crisis Intervention Team Training, and we've been doing it in Ventura County for almost 20 years. And it started out fairly slow, and it's training in psychological principles of interacting with people in crisis, be it drug-induced, mental health-related crisis, alcohol, you name it. The principles are all applicable to the type of work that we do. And I received nothing of the type when I was going through training in the 80s and 1990 is when I went through the academy training, 2 different academies to be precise. And I was a psychology major for my undergraduate work. And so I had a background in psychology, and it helped me interact with people. And I think back on it, and it just interested me at the time. I wanted a degree, but the utility of it and doing this type of work, I had no idea how valuable it would be until I really started applying it. And when we started training our deputies in those psychological principles of creating time, and when I was a young police officer, we were always rushed. We were in a hurry to get back out there and be ready for the big incident that was going to happen at some point in time. And so we didn't put any investment into solving problems, really. It was just Band-Aids. We'd arrest somebody, put them in jail, and we go back out there. And today, things are much different. We spend time dealing with people so that we don't have to have a use of force incident, so that we have better outcomes and hopefully actually solve problems versus just putting Band-Aids on them. So the crisis intervention team, we have almost 100% of our patrol force trained in crisis intervention team, and many of our jail deputies are trained. We're also so far advanced in this that we are training our civilian jail staff and our dispatchers. And so we're seeing really valuable outcomes at every level. Our use of force incidents, our injuries to deputies, the severity of our use of force incidents all dramatically declined as we saw more and more people trained in crisis intervention team principles. So really great thing locally. I'm a huge advocate for it.
That's excellent. Does the Sheriff Department also utilize mental health professionals to go out on calls? Yeah.
We do, and a lot of the activists were saying, hey, we think clinicians and counselors should be involved in dealing with the homeless, the mentally ill. We do too. And we actually have a program in our county. It's called RISE, and it's where we have a clinician who goes out with our homeless deputies, not deputies that are homeless, but our deputies that work with the homeless. The deputies might be homeless, I'm not sure, but we are people that we've assigned directly to work with the homeless community so that we can keep tabs on their health, bring services to them, hopefully get them out of homelessness. These clinicians ride with those homeless deputies and interact with the homeless community. We see a large percentage of the homeless community that's mentally ill, unfortunately. And it's a great partnership. I wish we could expand that and see more of it. I think it's a win-win, and the homeless situation is growing, and it's so complex and so difficult to solve. Something we're really focused on and will be for a long time to come.
And one of our attendees' question is, how many homeless people live in Ventura County?
We're doing a point in time count now in the county. It's actually been postponed because of the COVID surge. I believe our last count was around 1,200, but I need to look it up. It may be more than that. It may be in the 1,700 area. In fact, we can keep talking and I'll look it up real quick if that's helpful.
Okay. Well, while there have been a couple of questions about how the Sheriff's Department and the various police departments coordinate, who does what, and then another question was a little more specific, but maybe you want to answer it at the same time. And it was, let me find it. If a city does not contract with the sheriff for law enforcement, do they have to pay you to house the arrested individuals in the county jail, or must they house arrestees themselves on their dime?
Yeah, the county has a number of community programs, if you will, community in the sense that we share resources with the city police departments. We have a really great thing in California. It was spurred by the need for, consolidating resources to deal with all the natural disasters we have in the state, fires mostly. It's called a mutual aid system. And we employ it in law enforcement. If you were in Ventura or Santa Paula when the Thomas fire was going on, or in Oak Park, Thousand Oaks, Westlake Village area when the Woolsey fire was going on in 2018, you saw police officers and firefighters from everywhere. Thomas fire, you saw firemen from Montana and other places all across the country. And so we use that on a much smaller scale all the time right here in Ventura County. If the sheriff has a canine that's available and Oxnard needs a canine for searching a building or doing some other type of function that they're very good for, we will send that canine over there to help them. Oxnard will send their canine to Camarillo to help deputies if they need it. We have major crimes investigators. They're very skilled, highly experienced, well-known by both prosecution and defense counsels, which is a good thing for serious investigations. We share those major crimes investigators with Santa Paula if they have a homicide. They just don't have the resources or experience to investigate complex cases. We'll share them with Port Hueneme. We'll share them with Oxnard. If Oxnard has, and they've had previously sensitive cases. They had an incident where they shot somebody on accident that they shouldn't have. Sheriffs, major crimes detectives went in and investigated that case to have an element of neutrality and give more credibility to the investigation. The thought being that if Oxnard did their own, there would be suspicions about hey, they're covering to make it look like they didn't do something as badly as they did. And so we have aviation program. We share those resources. If Oxnard needs help, Ventura needs help with aviation support, the sheriff's aviation goes out and provides that. And so there's no cost. Our crime lab is probably the best example. And the other agencies use it. They submit their evidence, tool marks, DNA, blood alcohol, whatever, to our crime lab. They process that evidence at no cost to those agencies. So it's a county kind of a wraparound service the county sheriff provides to the municipalities.
Thank you for that. Someone poses a question or will ask you to please discuss the department's disciplinary measures and review of officers' behaviors.
That was actually, that's a big issue for us. We have an entire unit of very tenured supervisory level staff that are assigned to investigate citizen complaints. That's part of proving our legitimacy or establishing our legitimacy with the public, which helps us keep the public safe. And we have a complaint process. If it's very robust, you can file a complaint online, on a telephone with any employee. They're required by policy to accept the complaint and submit it for review. The process is transparent in the sense that, well, there's actually a lack of transparency because of personnel protective rules. Some of those are being stripped away for serious misconduct allegations, sustained allegations. So serious misconduct. In many cases, incidents of serious misconduct by sheriff's office employees have to be made public. And those are statutes that have been enacted in the last few years that have made those things, made those reports available to the public where they were previously concealed. And again, it was done by the legislature to help prove legitimacy as well as to hold law enforcement agencies accountable for investigating bad behavior. And so we have a number of layers of review for each internal investigation that we conduct. And we have a very good record of holding employees accountable, correcting bad behavior, and more importantly, identifying bad behavior before it becomes really bad. So dealing with those small issues that we have the experience of seeing lead to bigger issues if unchecked. And so we had partnered with our SAS organization to in some way look at commonalities amongst employees that are hired and end up not being good employees. And so perhaps, in looking at that and building into our hiring process, a filter, if you will, to look for people that are, have common characteristics with those employees that do bad behavior, and then, it's sort of a preventative type of approach to dealing with employee bad behavior, just eliminating it by not hiring a person who has characteristics that could and very likely lead to poor performance as peace officers in our community.
You may know that last week we spoke with the county assessor, and he said that he gets reviewed by the civil grand jury about once a year. Is that true of the sheriff's department as well?
It is. Our jails, our crime laboratory, our police academy are reviewed annually by the grand jury. We just had a grand jury do a review of a number of different processes, including our Internal Affairs Bureau. The grand jury actually has statutory authority to come in and dig through our personnel files. So they can do what nobody else can do. I can't even do it. We have internal policies in place to protect privacy. I could, certainly with cause, but the grand jury is able to come in and just as a watchdog entity, keep track of what we're doing and look at our investigations, both on the criminal and internal side, and submit a public report. They can't reveal protected materials in the public report, but they can let the public know what they did and what they found.
Many counties in California are instituting oversight commissions or committees over the sheriff's department. I presume that's different than the grand jury. Is there a plan for Ventura County to have an oversight commission overseeing the police and sheriff's department?
So there was a piece of legislation that was passed a couple of years ago, and it was a permissive. It was permissive legislation in the sense that it said boards of supervisors have the authority to establish an oversight panel commission of county sheriffs. Sheriffs, of course, are independently elected. The board of supervisors controls the sheriff's budget, but has no real control over the sheriff's management of resources, the sheriff's approach to enforcement in the community, the sheriff's operations in the jails, and so forth. They are able to manage the budget in a way that can be coercive, but generally there's no real influence. And there was this legislation was passed that said, hey, boards, you have the ability to do this and pay closer attention to what the sheriff's doing. The counter argument was that, hey, we already have a grand jury that does that and actually has statutory authority to do things that the board of supervisors could not empower an oversight board to do. In Ventura County, the board of supervisors called for the establishment of what we call a public safety racial equity advisory group. And this is a group composed largely of members from the activist community throughout the county and the justice partners, sheriff, probation chief, district attorney, sitting police chief from one of the municipal agencies that's not a county employee, and some county staff. And this group meets periodically, generally once a month, sometimes more frequently, and talks about contemporary issues related to law enforcement in the community. Intent is to kind of a conversation like we're having now, discuss the issues and have a dialogue and hopefully come to a mutual understanding of how and why we do things. And so that's what's happened in Ventura County. The board has and always has had the authority to establish an oversight commission. And this recent legislation was just sort of a kind of a reminder that they had that authority.
I wanted to get back, well, someone writes in, we heard you speak at the Seroptimus Stops Human and Sexual Trafficking event a few years ago, and that she says, thank you for doing that. What is currently being done about trafficking in Ventura County?
Human trafficking specifically?
Yes. Mhm.
So we actually have a task force, a full-time task force now in Ventura County. We started out a little slow on the uptake. Some other agencies had done this. We identified, really saw a proliferation of sex trafficking when that internet site Backpage, I think it was called backpage.com, was up and running. And we saw advertisements for the sex trade, in essence. And we discovered that this was going on right here in our community in Ventura County. We did some enforcement effort, more as kind of a sting effort to catch Johns, if you will. And this investigation unfolded into what was a fairly sophisticated regional human trafficking operation. And we dismantled the operation, and it proved very successful. It proved very resource intensive and very difficult to investigate. Very often the victims of human trafficking are in some kind of illegal trade, and they're held there captive by the people that manage them and run them, as generally under some sort of threat of force, either upon them themselves or upon their family members. So we see a lot of people come over, particularly in the sex trade, from Asia, East Asia. And very often the captors, the people that help them come over, first of all, they kind of treat them as indentured servants. They have to work off their fees for getting over to the US. But then they keep them in the business by threatening family members that are back in China or Taiwan or wherever it is that they come from. And so the threat also is that, hey, if you tell law enforcement about this, they're going to deport you, they're going to arrest you, they're not going to believe you, and we're going to hurt your family. And so there's a lot of incentive to not be cooperative and forthcoming with law enforcement agents. And so a very difficult time investigating those things. We also see the human trafficking on the labor side at, for example, the illicit marijuana farms that we see in the backcountry. We'd see Hispanic nationals, Mexican nationals largely, working in these farms. They actually live there in the backcountry, and they're resupplied periodically by the marijuana farmers. And it's a form of indentured servitude. You have to work here for X number of seasons until you can go off and do your own business. And very often that just never happens. They're forced into labor. And so we established, when we recognized that how difficult it was to investigate these crimes, how important it is to dismantle those organizations and how really prolific it is, kind of in the shadows of our society. We established a human trafficking task force in 2016. And it's grown to a full-time operation. We have grant funding for staffing and for operations. Every police agency contributes to it in some fashion. And they do some really great, sophisticated operations. We were one of the first agencies in the nation to do a wiretap for a human trafficking operation. Wiretaps are very difficult to obtain through the courts. They're very closely protected. It's a pretty significant invasion of privacy by government. But they're really invaluable when it comes to gathering evidence, especially in cases like these where people are communicating via telephone, and then revealing their travel patterns and the scope of their operations in that way. So great program locally. We do great work, and we've presented on the work that we've done at national conferences.
Thank you. This is back to the homeless count. David Marin wrote in that the homeless count in 2020 was 1,743. No count was performed in 2021 due to COVID, and that the data is in the State of the Region report, which some of us do have. So thank you for that, David.
Thank you, David.
I know there's more questions here, and let me scroll down a little bit more. Let's see, I think that was there is a follow-up to what was asked earlier, which says that the mutual aid agreements, do the mutual aid agreements cover housing local police department arrestees or not? The person didn't feel like that was actually answered.
I did not, you're right. No, there's no cost for local agencies to house prisoners in the county jail system.
Thank you. Someone would like to know, how are your contracts processed, and how long has it been since a new agreement with separate cities has been made and reviewed?
Yeah, so we have contracts, and it's the same contract for every city that we provide police services for. The document itself is very old. It's signed by a sheriff who is no longer alive. The document is legally sufficient, and it's reviewed every year and approved by the various cities that we service. We are in the midst of revising the document. The document is separate from the cost of police services. The cost of police services change every year, depending on what our costs are. We pass along those costs to the city. I mean, we don't give services other than those regional services, some of which we have spoken about. And so the cities that contract for police services, if our insurance cost goes up, and we, the cost therefore of a deputy or a professional employee increases, so does that cost to the city. Much of it we have little control over. The collective bargaining process, the employees get pay increases. We see costs increase from time to time related to benefits. Health insurance, most notably, is really skyrocketed in the last few years and probably is likely to continue. And so those costs are updated each year and presented to each of the cities each year. And in that same note, we have so if you're a city that let's say a new city is formed in Ventura County, and you want to find out what it would cost for the sheriff's office to provide police services, we would take a look at the city. We have a minimum level of staffing that would be required to provide a municipal police service for that city. And then we would have a pick list or kind of a menu of services that you could add on to if you want a motorcycle deputy for traffic enforcement, or an extra person to do some kind of function in the community. And so most cities have extra services, though, when times become difficult for, budgetarily, those services can be stripped away. But we still have a base level of service that we require for each city that we police.
We still have more questions, but we are running a little low on time. I did want to, there was one question here concerning COVID and the increase of Omicron in our area, and wondering what role law enforcement can do to keep the public safe, such as enforcing mask mandates and things like that. And I think that'll be the last question we'll be able to cover before I turn it over to Pat.
Sure. When COVID first appeared on the scene, and we had a lot of different rules being imposed upon the community, businesses, people, and so forth, it was very dynamic. The mask rules came along, and the civic leaders, other people, members of the community came to us and said, "Hey, what can we do about compelling people to wear masks?" And there were so many exceptions to the requirement to wear masks that were established by federal law, protective things that allowed people to have health-related exemptions for wearing a mask, either difficulty breathing. I haven't looked at it for some time, but there were a number of different things, all kind of HIPAA information that made it very difficult for us to know that there's a violation occurring. And a violation would be occurring if somebody who didn't have medical concerns that exempted them from wearing a mask was actually not wearing a mask. And we did have situations where people would go into businesses and deliberately, get in the space of other people and so forth. And we responded to public concerns. Our main focus was on keeping the peace and trying to help it, trying to shepherd people through this very difficult times. We had pressures from every piece of the spectrum on enforcement of health orders, from people standing too close on the street corner to going into a business and where the business was refusing to require that people sit apart or wear face coverings and so forth. This latest go around with Omicron, the health officer reinstituted certain measures in the form of an order, but there was no enforcement component added into the order because he knew how difficult it was for us to enforce. Really, difficult is an understatement. It's really impossible to enforce.
Well, thank you. I'm sorry if we didn't get to anyone's question. We did have a lot of questions in the chat, and I do appreciate you answering them, taking the time today. And at this point, I'm going to turn it back over to Pat with a few concluding remarks. Thank you so much, Sheriff.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, Sheriff Ayub, in joining us today and helping us to better understand the role and responsibilities of the County Sheriff's Office. Your presentation was very detailed in helping us understand our relative questions that we had for Ventura County, and do enjoy having the opportunity to meet you as well. Thank you for coming to our program today. It's been our pleasure.
Thank you all for the great questions and the opportunity to chat with you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Now I would like to remind everyone that next Wednesday, we will be meeting at the same time and place and hearing from District Attorney Eric Nazarenko. As a reminder, recordings of this session and all future ones will be available. Please go to the League of Women Voters website to access a link to the recording. Thank you to everyone for attending, and we look forward to seeing you again next week. This concludes today's presentation.